Welcome to another edition of Legislative Report. I'm your host, Anthony Tezak. The 200th session of the Pennsylvania General Assembly has come to a close. Here with a recap of the 2015-2016 session's highlights and to offer us a preview of the upcoming legislative session is State Representative Ryan Mackenzie. Representative, welcome, and
Hi,
thanks
Anthony.
for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me back.
Before we move forward, I guess it's appropriate to say happy 200th session.
Yeah.
Given that session lasts 2 years, does that mean that this legislative body has been around for 400
Well,
years?
not quite. The General Assembly started meeting here in Pennsylvania in November 1776, and it's been 2-year increments for quite a while. Before that, it was 1-year increments was the session term. And then even before that, even before 1776, there was a colonial assembly here in Pennsylvania going back to 1682. So a long history here in Pennsylvania, and you have obviously some famous faces in the General Assembly in the past, including Ben Franklin. So really a lot of history here in the General Assembly in Pennsylvania.
What do you see the role of state government, and what are the most important issues that it addresses?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one that I get often. And so for me, really, I try to focus in 4 different categories. So certainly creating jobs and helping promote job creation in the private sector is the first one. Second, protecting taxpayers, making sure we're always using the dollars that we get sent most effectively and efficiently. Third is strengthening education. Big part of state government, about 40% of our budget goes towards education, and we have a responsibility to make sure that every Pennsylvania student gets an appropriate education here in the state. And then the fourth is reforming government. And I find that all too often government just kind of grows, but nobody ever goes back and looks at those programs to make sure they're actually doing what they were intended to do, and either reforming the program or, in some cases, eliminating it if it's no longer effective or needed.
We're going to talk about some of those topics that you mentioned. Yeah. Let's start with education. Finishing this session, we now have a record investment in pre-K to 12 education. Tell us about what else has been done for education over the past 2 years.
Yeah, so I think there has been some great progress made here in Pennsylvania and on the education front this session. Like you said, starting from pre-K, so we know the importance of pre-K education now, what that means for the long-term trajectory of a student. If you can get them quality pre-K at that early age, they're going to have a much greater chance of being a successful and productive member of our society, not just in terms of education, but in terms of going on to being successful in life and staying out of prison even. There are metrics even and data tied to that. So, starting with pre-K, going all the way through the school system, obviously those are some of the most formative years for students as well. And then going into things like career and technical education. So that's something I've been a big proponent of since I've joined the General Assembly. And we've been able to raise awareness on the need for those individuals and the skills that they can bring to the table. So we're getting more people into those training programs. We're seeing a demand increase for it as retirements occur. And individuals who go into the career and tech fields can make terrific wages and have great careers. And so we've seen and been able to actually raise awareness on that and start advancing that as well. And then obviously into other job training and workforce development programs. So tremendous success there, and that's been a highlight for us. As you mentioned, record investment, and then also from the state level, and then also a big change that I was very proud of that we were able to make this year was introducing the basic education funding formula. So for a long time here in Pennsylvania, funding went out based on political whim, which is really inappropriate. And so we were able to introduce a funding formula, which now the dollars go out most heavily weighted based on the number of students in a school district, which is reasonable and appropriate. And then, but it also factors in things like poverty, English as a second language requirements, small school districts. So all of those different variables weigh into that formula. And again, so a real positive change, so there's more predictability for schools, less politics in the education funding here in Pennsylvania.
And moving on to the next topic, and in a way this ties into education, is protecting the taxpayer. This session School Watch was established and put into place. For those at home that may not know what they do, tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so these are great transparency mechanisms. I think it's a good thing. We've been increasing and promoting transparency in state government ever since I've been here. So things like Pen Watch already went into place, School Watch. What these programs are is now that all of this information is available online about state and school district budgets and spending. So you can go online, you can just Google either of those terms, you'll be able to find their websites. If not, you can contact our office for more information. But again, it's just about transparency. So people want to know where their tax dollars go, and obviously then hold elected officials and individuals who are running local government entities accountable for those spending decisions. And so I think it's great. It's a very positive reform, and I was happy to support it.
Also, as far as protecting taxpayers go, I don't think that was any more apparent than this past session with Governor Wolf and his budget proposals. You and the Republican caucus were able to hold the line on spending and tax increases, which couldn't have been easy with the appetite for spending this governor has. How'd you do it?
Absolutely. So, Governor Wolf came into office saying that he was a businessman and looking to help move the state forward. In his first year budget, it was anything but that. What we saw was actually an attack on taxpayers across Pennsylvania. He proposed in his first year budget about a $30 billion budget. He proposed a $4.7 billion tax increase, the single largest tax increase proposed in Pennsylvania history, and a tax increase that was larger than all other 49 states combined that year. And so what we saw was, again, basically wanting to raise the sales tax, the income tax, business taxes, user taxes. I mean, any tax you could think of, he was proposing to raise it. And so we were able to fight that attack off against taxpayers, protect taxpayers, hold the line, and again, really the responsible thing to do. What we saw way back in the Rendell years, which Governor Wolf was a part of the Rendell administration, we saw that the inflation and population growth was about 20%, yet spending and taxes that go along with spending went up 40% in that same period of time. So that's what we're trying to avoid with this Democrat governor and this administration. And so far, we've been successful in holding the line and protecting taxpayers.
Another pillar is job creation. And again, going back to the budget, it was not very small business friendly. However, there were initiatives that were enacted to encourage private sector job creation. Tell us about some of those.
Absolutely. So again, a big thing we can do is foster and create an economic climate here in Pennsylvania that is beneficial for small businesses, large businesses, any type of employer who wants to either locate or expand here in Pennsylvania. We want to make sure we're a tax-friendly and regulatory-friendly environment. And so I've been successful since I've been in office doing passing legislation, things like the elimination of the small business inheritance tax. So as a business transitions from one generation to another, we've been able to eliminate that inheritance tax for small businesses. That was legislation that I was the prime sponsor of back in 2013. This session, we've had continued success on this front. I've been able to pass legislation to help specifically our veterans. And again, in the entrepreneurial front, we're seeing more veterans, especially young veterans who return from service, wanting to go the entrepreneurial route. And so I was able to pass House Bill 1600 and get that signed into law. And what that does is it waives the startup filing fees for veteran-owned small businesses. And so if we want these individuals to return to Pennsylvania and start a business, let's clear out some of those barriers for them. They can create jobs for themselves and others in our community, make it more likely that they stay and locate here in Pennsylvania, and again, create jobs in our state. And so that's out there, and again, we're just going to continue to advance that. We need to do more in workforce development, certainly, and that's been something I've been leading on as well, but obviously more work to be done.
In the age of government transparency, another issue that really you've been working on since you were elected back in 2012 is reforming government. And you, again, had a piece of legislation that was introduced to help with government reform. That's House Bill 850. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So government reform is one of these topics. It's not as exciting as some of the other topics you work on. Nobody's typically beating down your door, asking you to do this type of work. But I think it's one of the necessary things that we need to do in government to make sure that, again, we're competitive with other states and competitive in a global environment. And so House Bill 850 it deals with financial services, and specifically a portion of financial services called money transmitters. And so this law had not been updated since 1977. When it initially went into place, it dealt with things like Western Union or American Express traveler's checks. Well, those aren't used as frequently by the individual as they were in the past. Now money transmission has taken on all kinds of forms. So things like PayPal and Venmo are these new technologies that are out there that people are using to transmit money either to themselves or business to business. And so we wanted to update the statute, eliminate some of the barriers that were there for purely business to business transactions. We wanted to update the language to recognize all of these new things, which were already being covered under the Money Transmitter Act, so we aren't expanding who's being covered under this, but we did want to update the language in the legislation so that the businesses that were in that space had more clearly an understanding of how they had to comply with the law, what was expected of them, and also what was expected in terms of consumer protections. So we were able to update that. We were able to get broad bipartisan support for this legislation, industry buy-in, but at the same time, again, updating and reforming government. So a positive step, again, making our state more friendly to businesses, and again, updating something that hadn't been looked at in close to 40 years here.
And we only have about 30 seconds left. However, as we come to the close of the 200th legislative session, are there any issues that maybe didn't get to the governor's desk this session that you would hope to see done next year?
Sure, there's always more work to be done, and so I have a couple of bills that have made it out of the House and over to the Senate, and just because of time constraints, more than anything, we weren't able to get that done. So those two specific bills, one, I mentioned workforce development, so more workforce and career awareness for our students who are in high school and middle schools, I think is very important in terms of their long-term prospects. So I have legislation known as Career Bound. It passed through the House unanimously. It's over in the Senate. That's something we'll take up again next session to try and help continue to advance our workforce development and youth awareness here in the state of different jobs. And the second is on stroke centers, a leading cause of death in Pennsylvania. We really need to update our Stroke Centers Act here in Pennsylvania so that individuals who do experience a stroke can get to the appropriate hospital in the shortest amount of time. And again, that passed through the House unanimously right at the end of session, though, and so that's something I'm very confident will come up again at the beginning of the next session, and we'll be able to update so that we can get better health care for Pennsylvania citizens and actually save lives.
All right, Representative Mackenzie, congratulations on a successful 200th legislative session, and we look forward to having you back during the 201st legislative session
Absolutely.
to talk about the issues that you'll be addressing then.
Well, thank you, Anthony. I appreciate it.
That's all the time we have for today's program. If you have any questions about what you've seen today, Representative Mackenzie's contact information will be on your screen in just a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join us again next time for another edition of Legislative Report.